What's up, everybody, and welcome back to another video from the 10-7 MMA channel. And this video might be triggering for some folks because I'm about to agree with Dean Thomas. I know a lot of people have been pissed off from Dean Thomas's recent comments. I was pissed off by his comments about Khamzat Chimaev, but here we are once again, and this time I'm actually agreeing with him. But there's a little caveat. Now, we're going to go through the specific comments, but basically what he said about like 9 months ago is that he thinks the UFC should trade Magomed Ankalaev, current light heavyweight champ, which is a little crazy, but he's saying we should trade him for Dakota Ditcheva. And a lot of people are getting pissed off about this, especially because this comes after multiple weird comments about other fighters from the similar regions in the world. So it's kind of what's going on? What's Dean Thomas's angle? Does he have some weird prejudice towards these fighters? I mean, I think that's an exaggeration, but his comments are a little bit weird, and they do follow a trend. Anyways, we're going to talk about all that. Nevertheless, in this particular instance, I actually agree with Dean Thomas, as crazy as it sounds, okay? But it's not because of Ankalaev. It's because of Dakota Ditcheva, and it's because she is a superstar waiting to fully come into her own. She's already the biggest star in the PFL, in my opinion, by far. But if she were to come over to the UFC, and obviously I've made multiple videos on this channel about this in particular, so if you've seen those, you know what I'm talking about. But I believe if she came to the UFC, she would be the biggest female star possibly in the history of the UFC, probably, assuming she continues to win and does what we think she'll do in the flyweight division, which is win, win, win. I think her fighting style is incredible to watch. She almost always gets finishes with the exception of the last fight, but that was still an incredible fight. I mean, it was so fun to watch that decision because she put on a clinic against her opponent. But I think she would do the same thing, honestly, in the UFC. And I know Daniel Cormier says, well, the competition's going to rise. She may not continue to do what she's going to do, but so many people have come out and watched her fighting style and seen how good she is. And they do believe that even as the competition level would rise in the UFC, she would still do the same thing to the female fighters in the flyweight division in the UFC. So in this particular instance, I actually agree with Dean Thomas's seemingly crazy take. But again, it's only because he wants to trade with Dakota Ditcheva. And I would actually go further to say that there are plenty of fighters actually in the UFC that I think would be a worthy trade. Again, just like in fantasy football or anything like that we play, right? If you want to trade, you're going to trade where you get improved value, improved viewership from the trade. So it's not to say anything negative about Ankalaev or anybody else. It's just that I believe the potential for Dakota Ditcheva to be a Ronda Rousey level superstar or above is so high that it could be a worthwhile trade, assuming the wins continue, which I 100% believe they would. But assuming that continues, it would be. This is not a debatable thing. This is a mathematical equation, and it is just true. All right, let's get into the mix here. We're going to jump through the entire history of how this began. And he has a discussion earlier today with Daniel Cormier about this controversial statement. So let's start here. Let's hear exactly what he said, trying to doubling down, tripling down, as Dean Thomas likes to do on his crazy takes. Listen to what he has to say, and Daniel Cormier kind of grills him here. Check it out.
UFC light heavyweight champion. There has to be something that was lost in translation when you made that statement. Please tell me that.
All right, so first off, let me say this. I've been saying this for 2 years. I've been saying this for 2 years that they needed to make that trade.
About Ankalaev?
Yes.
Why?
When Ankalaev was running around trying to get fights, begging for fights, I said trade his ass to the PFL where he can go win $1 million. And so that's what I was saying. So the clip that we just heard was actually a year ago.
Shut up, Dean.
It was a year ago where he was still begging for fights. And I was like, yo, just trade him to the PFL because he could make $1 million there. He'd win the tournaments there, and we could use Dakota. Now, here's the thing. So I went back after all this thing blew up. I'm surprised that they conveniently brought it out now when he's defending. He's the champion.
He's about to fight for a world title. So, of course, this is
the perfect time for them to bring it out now. But I went back, and not only am I doubling down, I'm tripling down, and I'm still saying that it would be a better trade.
Dean, get out of here. Dean.
I am tripling down on this. Dakota Ditcheva, she is 15-0 with an 80% knockout rate. If you don't think that the UFC could make her a star, one of the biggest stars in all of MMA, right, a blonde-headed girl next door, a pretty girl that has an 80% knockout rate, she would be the biggest star in the UFC.
It's so creepy when he talks about her look and the blonde heading. I don't know. Anyways, but what he's saying, there's merit to that. Okay, so like, I truly believe he's right that she could be one of the biggest stars in the history of MMA, the biggest female star. I really think that, and I've said this multiple times, because of her. It's honestly more because of her personality than her look, but because she's authentic, she's real, she's funny, she's got that girl next door vibe. It's all of those things. Plus, she's a killer. She's an absolute killer, and she does get crazy knockouts, crazy finishes. Again, with the exception of the last fight, she didn't get a finish and she was very disappointed. But even still, if you watch that fight, it was a banger. She put on a clinic. She laid down so much damage. Just her opponent was tough as nails and she just would not go down. Now, I think the UFC should do a trade in general. Why he had to bring up Ankalaev in particular, I can see why that's aggravating people. Like, why are you picking on Ankalaev, especially now that he's champ? Granted, those statements are from a while ago. I think that's what's triggering people. But I will say, in general, I think there's a lot of fighters that, and it's not saying anything negative about the fighters that would be traded, but I think Dakota Ditcheva is so high value, so top tier, so once in a lifetime type of a fighter that a trade would be warranted with a lot of fighters, okay? Potentially including Ankalaev. And again, that's not me saying anything negative about Ankalaev. It's just Dakota Ditcheva is that special. That's my opinion. And that's why I'll give Dean Thomas some leeway here, even though he's getting a lot of flack. Now, to go to the other side, MMA Joey has been covering this, and he has a different angle, and there might be something to this, and I wanted to highlight what MMA Joey has to say, because I remember Dean Thomas had some negative things to say about Khamzat too, which really pissed me off, and I didn't understand where it was coming from. So MMA Joey has been following this much more closely than I have. Listen to his comments on Dean Thomas and his takes, and I guess he's obviously alleging Dagestani hate, right? I said Dagestani bias here, but check out this clip, and then we're going to chat about it.
Dean Thomas continues to spew anti-Dagestani propaganda the entirety of 2025. Islam Makhachev criticism? Check. Khamzat Chimaev criticism? Check. Magomed Ankalaev criticism? Check. He continues to regurgitate some of the dumbest narratives in the sport, and I'm starting to notice a trend here. Islam's not pound for pound number one if he beats JDM, but Ilya is for beating Charles Oliveira. Dumb as hell. The Khamzat Chimaev inactivity, the Khamzat Chimaev disaster of becoming champion. Dean Thomas, I covered that pretty extensively. And then we also have something that's kind of had a little bit of an uproar in the MMA community. Dean Thomas had the audacity to say that Magomed Ankalaev should be traded away from the UFC for PFL's Dakota Ditcheva, which we're going to get to actual context on that in a second. But Dean Thomas is one of the biggest fucking clowns in the sport of MMA. And I'm not sure if it's extreme bias or just low IQ regurgitating some of the popular anti-Dagestani or anti-Caucasus region fighter narratives that make literal no sense when you actually break them down and add context to them. So that's what we're going to do in this video, because some of the things that he said about Khamzat Chimaev are outright delusional and lacking all context and lacking any real actual thoughts.
I agree with him about the Khamzat Chimaev takes for sure. I was perplexed as well when Dean Thomas acted like, of course he has an activity problem, but he wasn't looking at, you know what I mean? He was shocked and perplexed that people were so taken aback by his statements about Khamzat being a disaster as a champion, but it was a really dumb take. Khamzat is such a megastar. And then the one thing that you could kind of, I guess, like, you could look at his fighting record and say, okay, well, maybe Dean Thomas does have a point, because he's not been as active as he was at the beginning. It's obviously slowed down, but there were explanations for all of that. And so I think Dean Thomas just sometimes maybe talks without properly thinking through his thoughts. And so it is what it is. I was equally perplexed there, but I'll say one thing in his defense, and I know MMA Joey, like, you got to give MMA Joey a lot of credit, because he'll defend a lot of guys that don't usually get defended, that maybe like Bilal Muhammad, somebody who people don't really like. He's really defended and had his back. And I respect that, because it actually made me look at Bilal Muhammad in a different way and become more of a fan of him. And I think he's doing something similar here on behalf of Magomed Ankalaev, and he loves and he does appreciate the skill that Magomed Ankalaev brings. He's not just doing it for no reason. He's actually a fan of his. But the one thing I think maybe why Dean is picking on Magomed Ankalaev is that one of the issues for fighters, and I think MMA Joey will disagree with me on this, but it is personal preference, is because Magomed Ankalaev is always using a translator for English speaking fans like myself or other language speaking fans that can't hear him speak. It's harder to connect with fighters that way. So it's just that much more difficult to build a fan base. You have your outliers like Alex Pereira or different things like that, where their fighting style is just so crazy that it kind of doesn't matter. But I think that's one of the issues that Magomed Ankalaev is facing, even though he's a phenomenal fighter and obviously he's the champ of the light heavyweight division, which is amazing. Beat Alex Pereira, who so many people fought and lost against. So he's obviously very skilled, but I think this is part of what made Dean Thomas pick on Ankalaev. It's just because of the lack of connection, and that just happens very often when fighters can't speak. I mean, even Diego Lopez is a fan favorite, but I mean, you guys tell me if you agree or disagree, but think about how much cooler it was to hear him speak in English, and you can see his personality and his nature and his sense of humor and all those things. I think it adds a lot to a lot of fans, maybe not all fans, but I do think that's partially why Dean Thomas was calling out specifically for the Ankalaev trade as opposed to anybody else. But anyways, let's move on. Now, the next thing that I pointed out from MMA Joey's video is this crazy comment from Dean Thomas. And this did actually piss me off and maybe lends a little bit of credibility to Dean Thomas maybe having some subconscious biases here, because it's like, I'm going to play the clip about what he says about the pronunciation of Imavov's name. And then I'm going to tell you why it kind of hits home with me, because I have a unique name, Huzaifa, right? And it's the same amount of syllables. It's 3 syllables. It's a little bit different. And sometimes I've encountered people in the US growing up where I'll introduce myself and they'll say, wait. Oh, that's too hard. Can you give me a nickname? Just give me something short to call you by. And be like, okay, Huzaifa, because it's disrespectful. Okay. And it's hard, maybe hard to understand that if you don't have a unique name or kind of a name stemming from another country, that then you're here and people say, it's like, yo, dude, you literally can't learn 3 syllables, repeat it a couple times and figure it out, or figure out a way, or you just want to give me a nickname for your convenience when my family named me. And the names have significance in my family. My grandmother named me, and people aren't aware of this, but it's very disrespectful. And that's kind of the vibes that Dean Thomas is giving off here. And so I do find it offensive. Do I think he's racist? No, I don't think that. But I think he's not thinking. He's not thinking. And this is, I think, why he keeps getting himself in hot water with these comments. He speaks, he's a little bit brash, he's a little bit arrogant, and he's not thinking through his commentary and how it could affect people, I think. And I think that's why he's getting the flack he's getting. But anyways, listen to this comment that he has to say about Imavov. It is dumb, I gotta say. It's stupid.
Listen to this. He's talking about Imavov versus Baralho coming up. Listen to this.
Well, I mean, so with Imavov, the fact that he had to remind everybody how to pronounce his name is a bad sign. That's all.
By the way, look at that look. Did you guys see that look right there? Let's rewind that back a little bit.
To remind everybody how to pronounce his name is a bad sign.
If this isn't effeminate cucky vibes, if I've ever seen it. If this isn't effeminate cucky vibes, if I've ever seen it. By the way, we're also going to get into, I don't even know if I said this in the beginning now. DC, this is a video DC did with Dean Thomas, where DC actually called him out and embarrassed him. I want to do a video on this at the time, but there was a lot of 319 content ideas that I had. I never got around to covering it. We're going to cover it in this video as well. But let's listen. Let's continue. Effeminate cucky vibes, we got that. If you don't have a name,
that's always a bad. You can't fight for a title when no one knows how to pronounce your name. Like, it's just, you can't do it. Like, you need a nickname. Like, even with like Reiner de Ritter, like, we can't really say his name right, so we just call him RDR. You know what I'm saying? We give when you get a nickname or a shortcut to your name, that's when you know you're ready for a title. And Imavov ain't got that. Like, that's the unfortunate situation. And in fact, like, every time I say his name, I have to think in my head to make sure I get it right, because I don't want to be disrespectful.
He may not realize, but I am offended, like, when he says that. Now, I don't think he meant it in an offensive way, and he doesn't have the experience of having one of these types of names like Huzaifa or like Imavov to understand how annoying somebody saying something like this is. It's aggravating to hear that. Okay, so coming from having that same experience. But the hilarious part about this is he's criticizing Imavov, and who does he want to be traded for? Ditcheva. And by the way, he mispronounced her name when he talked to Daniel Cormier. Rewind it and go back, and you'll hear that he mispronounces her name. I know that because I'm a big fan of hers, and I looked up very carefully how to pronounce her name. Dakota Ditcheva. And those are both 3 syllables, the same amount of syllables as Imavov's name. So obviously, this does lead to the question of, dog, you're being a hater on these, like, Caucasus region sounding names. You know what I'm saying? And then all of a sudden you're not even mentioning anything about Ditcheva or Dakota. Those are both the same amount of syllables. Like, I think this is what is irritating people, and it is ridiculous. So anyways, I just wanted to highlight that. And MMA Joey, I think, does a good job. Do I actually think Dean Thomas has a hardcore, like, specific prejudice against this region? I doubt it. I highly doubt it. Maybe there's some weird subconscious thing where he's not so into. I actually don't even know. I don't know what the heck he's talking about or what's going on. But anyways, to give him a little bit of defense, I think with Ankalaev in particular, actually you could kind of apply this to Imavov because neither of them speak English. Maybe it's that lack of connection that he's feeling where he's throwing these guys under the bus because he doesn't listen to their interviews or whatever. I don't know. Imavov's got an amazing fighting style though. Actually, so does Ankalaev. I don't know. I'm just trying to theorize what's going on. But to summarize and to bring this video to full circle, despite Dean Thomas's weird statements about name pronunciations and bizarre takes like that, I actually am going to side with him slightly, only because he's talking about Dakota Ditcheva. His comments about Imavov are crazy. And Imavov I think he's an awesome fight style. I would love to hear him speak in English too, just so I could have a greater connection with him. But I love his fight style. I thought he did an awesome job. I'm looking forward to him fighting for the title. But yeah, Dakota Ditcheva is a megastar waiting to be born. Once she gets to the UFC, she will explode. And I hope the UFC does do that and does make a trade happen sooner rather than later. But we shall see. Anyways, that's my take. Let me know what you think in the comments. Thank you guys so much for joining. We'll see you in the next video. Take it easy.